Himay Dhamma Patipadya Buddhang Pujemi Dhammang Pujemi Sanghang Pujemi. I worship the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha by practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. May this humble offering be accepted. जैसा मैंने शनिवार को निवेदन किया था, 4 दिन हमारे इंटरेक्शन के बचे हैं। इसमें मैं प्रयास करूंगा कि जो भी हमने पिछले लगभग 3 महीने में चर्चा की है उसका सार आपके सामने संक्षेप में प्रस्तुत किया जाए, क्योंकि वो चर्चाएं जो थी ऑर्गेनिकली ग्रो हुई, ऐसा मैंने प्लान नहीं किया था, तो काफ़ी उसमें रिपीटिशंस भी हुए, आगे पीछे भी हुआ, तो उसको थोड़ा तरतीब से रख के आपके सम्मुख पेश करता हूँ। आज आई वुड लाइक टू शेयर कि इसकी आवश्यकता क्यों पड़ी और ये सब किया क्या, चर्चा क्यों की इस तरह की और इसी सब्जेक्ट पे क्यों की। इमीडिएट कॉज तो यही था कि वासा का पीरियड था और कुछ लग रहा था कि हमारे इवनिंग सेशंस जो हैं उनमें रूटीन हो गए हैं बिल्कुल। कुछ मॉर्निंग सेशंस में तो हम एक पुस्तक को पढ़ते थे, नहीं फिर डिस्कशन थोड़ा बहुत होता था, एटलीस्ट समझते थे, कुछ रिफ्लेक्शन होता था। इवनिंग में नहीं हो रहा था, तो मुझे लगा कि कुछ करना चाहिए। और फिर वासा का पीरियड तो हमने लगा चलो पूरा वास इस बार इंटेंसिव स्टडी करके और समझ के किया जाए, अपनी धर्म में वस्तु स्थिति को समझते हुए। तो ये दिल्ली में जैसे आपको मालूम होगा कि अप्रैल में की स्थिति बहुत ही खराब थी दिल्ली में। कोविड के कारण बहुत से मित्र, relatives, young and old, passed away. And more than that was the situation which existed, Ambulances were not available to take the people to the hospital. Hospital was not available. Beds were not available. If you get a bed, then medicines are not available. If you get medicine, oxygen is in short supply. And, so many people died waiting for the oxygen supply to be restored. And it was such a painful thing, to see. Virtually Holocaust like situations. यहाँ पे वहाँ पे गैस चैम्बर में लोग मारा जा रहा था, यहाँ पे हॉस्पिटल में लोगों का दम घुट रहा था क्योंकि ऑक्सीजन नहीं दी जा रही थी. It's quite painful. And then the question naturally arose, कब तक चलता रहेगा, and how do we really, what is the solution to this really? अब an apparent solution तो यही था कि हाँ ये इम्प्रूव किया जाए, कंडीशन इम्प्रूव होनी चाहिए, वो होनी चाहिए, कुछ चलो डोनेशन करते हैं, कुछ करते हैं, let us get oxygen concentrators, this, that. But if reflected deeply from the point of Dhamma, it is clear that that's not the real reason. The real reason is that of my suffering is that I am getting born actually. Apparent, those are all apparent reasons. The deep reason is that I am getting born again and again and again. And all the practices which you've done intensely for so long, they're not really ensured that we reach a stage of irreversible transformation. Still, there's a lot of work to be done. So we investigated, why is it that progress is not commensurate with the efforts? And that naturally it revealed that there are some, while the intensity of the practice and the Dhamma-Samvega is there, still there are periods of day when this mindfulness is not strong, and the way we look at the world as real. And so theoretically, we have been studying it a number of times. Shunyato lokam avekhanto with all anicca, anatta, dukkha. Somehow it's not getting really internalized. And when Ajahn Chah's teaching, that people think walking meditation, sitting meditation, listening talks, that is the practice. But he said there's only the outer forms of practice. The real practice is when mind encounters a sense object. And when people say things which you don't like, there are situations which you don't like, there is resentment, situations which you like, people which you like, there is pleasure, and we keep on oscillating. And that's when Ajahn Chah says that's the place to practice. And it was clear that that at that place the practice wasn't so strong as it ought to be. And tanha was arising even unconsciously, not being aware of it. We समझते हैं सतिपट्ठान में यम लोके पिय रूपम सात रूपम एथे सा तन्हा उपज्यमाना उपज्यति एथे निवस्यमाना निवस्यति. तो इस श्लोक में जो भी प्रिय लगता है वहां पे अच्छा लगता है, एग्रीएबल लगता है, वहीं पे तृष्णा जागती है और वहीं जागती है और वहीं टिक जाती है, वहीं निवास करती है उसका. और हमारी सामान्य साधना में तो हमको ही लगता है कि आंख से कोई रूप देखा तो रूप हमको अच्छा लगता है, तो रूप के प्रति हमको निर्वेद भाव बनाने की कोशिश करनी चाहिए. वी शुड अंडरस्टैंड नेचर ऑफ रूप एंड सो दैट वी डोंट गेट अट्रैक्टेड टुवर्ड्स इट. बट एक्चुअली दैट्स नॉट ऑल. जब हमने, आप याद होगा शुरू में सीरीज में महासती पट्ठान सूत्र से कोट किया था, कहाँ कहाँ पे तृष्णा जागती है. तो हर एक इंद्रिय के द्वार पे 10 जगह पे तृष्णा जागने का समाप्त. चक्षु लोके पिय रूपम सात रूपम सोतम लोके घानम लोके. तो हमारी जो इंद्रियां हैं, चक्षु है, घान है, नाक है, कान, आंख है, उनमें उनके प्रति तृष्णा जागती है. फिर रूपा लोके, सद्दा लोके, गंधा लोके. वी हैव बीन चैंटिंग इट इन आवर कोर्सेज. वहां पे श्रद्धा जागती है. देन चक्षु विज्ञानम लोके, सोत जो विज्ञान है उसके प्रति श्रद्धा तृष्णा जागती है कि मेरी आंखें ठीक रही. अब बुढ़ापे में पता चलता है जब आंख की आईसाइट खराब हो रही है तो कितनी दिक्कत हो रही है. एंड देन चक्षु संपस्सो लोके, कुछ कांटेक्ट होते रहना चाहिए, कुछ दिखते रहना चाहिए, कुछ सुनते रहना चाहिए. देन चक्षु संपस्सया वेदना लोके, फीलिंग जो है हर एक इंद्रिय के द्वार पे हो रही है, उस पे जाग रही है. परसेप्शन है, उस पे जाग रही है. रूप संज्ञा, शब्द संज्ञा, गंध संज्ञा. देन इंटेंशन है, रूप संचेतना, शब्द संचेतना. एंड देन क्रेविंग है, रूप तन्हा, शब्द तन्हा. देन उनके विचार आते हैं बैठे बैठे ही, रूप वितक को रोके, शब्द वितक को लोके. देन इन द रियल्म ऑफ, उसमें विचार विचरण करता है मन, रूप विचारो लोके, शब्द विचार. जस्ट टू मेनी थिंग्स टू टेक केयर. 6 into 10, 60 different places where this tanha can arise. And the Lord says, Etesha tanha upajyamana upajyati nivasamana nivasati. And वहीं पे उसका निरोध होगा. यम लोके पिय रूपम सातु रूपम एतस्य तन्हा पहीयमाना पहीयति एथ निरुज्यमाना निरुज्यति. तो 24 घंटे हम सजग रहें इतने सब के प्रति और उसको देखते रहें और कहीं हमारी तृष्णा ना जागे. Pretty huge affair. Of course we have to do it. But then is there no other way? And the Lord himself tells us there are ways. Try to change your perception so that tanha doesn't arise in the first place. Why should we allow it to arise and then try to see it and wait for it to cease and then arising, passing away? Why not develop cognition to such an extent? हमारी ट्रेनिंग की जाए, कॉग्निटिव ट्रेनिंग हो, जिसे आजकल माइंडफुलनेस बेस्ड कॉग्निटिव ट्रेनिंग कहते हैं. Ashko, that is oriented towards depression, but I'm talking of basic Buddha's cognitive training. Yeah? You can't overcome sensory pleasure attraction by suppression and forceful attack on it. It has to be done on the basis of yatha bhuta jnana darshanam, understanding the nature of sensory happiness. और if you इसको हम ठीक से समझते हैं तो मालूम पड़ता है इसमें कुछ रखा नहीं है. Then it gives rise to NIBBIDA, disenchantment. And if disenchantment arises, path beyond is irreversible. It becomes pretty straightforward. And that is actually the correct practice. वो हमने पढ़ा हुआ है, समझा हुआ है. मैं रोज शांत करता आ रहा हूँ शाम को, धम्मानुधम्मा पटिपदा बुद्धम पूजयामि. What is this Dhamma-Dhamma Patipada? That's it. That Patipada which leads to NIBBIDA. That's what Buddha says. In fact, if you recall, हमने शुरू इससे किया था कि भगवान ने अपने मेडिटेशन टीचर्स को क्यों छोड़ दिया, लार कलाम उद्ध कराम पुत्ता का. तो आर्य परियशना सूत्र में भगवान स्पष्ट कहते हैं, नायम धम्मो निब्बिदाय न विरागाय न निरोधाय न उपशमाय न विन्याय न संबोधाय न निब्बानाय संबद्धति. ये जो आपकी शिक्षा है, न निवेद नहीं जागती, विराग नहीं जागता, निरोध नहीं होता. So that's not what I am looking for. I am looking for something which takes me in direction of NIBBIDA, and then subsequent things will be quite straightforward. And this is what Buddha talks about. There are 4 suttas, Manudhamma suttas in Sanyutta Nikaya 22.39 to 42, but he defines when is Bhikkhu practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. What is Dhamma-Dhamma Patipana? He defines very clearly. He should dwell and goes in, let me read it. Rupe nibbidda bahulo vihareya. Vedanaya nibbidda bahulo vihareya. Sanyaya sankhare suvinyane, and so on. So the meditator should dwell engrossed in disenchantment towards form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. And the one who dwells in that state, a disenchantment toward that, then he will understand form, feeling, perception, and one who fully understands that, then he is freed. He is freed from birth, aging, death. This is the promise of Lord Buddha. So that's what is meant by Dhamma-Dhamma Patipada. Any teaching, whatsoever it is, which takes us in that direction, so that the attraction of the world is replaced by proper realization of its true nature. Anatta, anicca, dukkha, anatta, leading to nibbida. And then, of course, in other suttas, Bhagavan bata hai, anicca-nupassi vihareya, dukkha-nupassi vihareya, and anatta-nupassi vihareya. You dwell contemplating these sannyas. So it becomes clear that that is the real practice. In fact, there is another sutta in Sanyutta Nikaya जिसमें भगवान कहते हैं, what should a teacher of Dhamma teach? And he says, if a bhikkhu teaches Dhamma for the purpose of disenchantment towards the phenomena, including aging and death and all that, he can be called a bhikkhu who is a speaker on Dhamma. So that's it. Teaching of Dhamma should be also oriented entirely towards that, in variety of ways. If a bhikkhu is practicing for the purpose of disenchantment towards aging and death, for its fading away cessation, he can be called a bhikkhu who is practicing in accordance with Dhamma, and so on. So it becomes clear that the whole idea of Buddha's teaching is that we develop our perception in such a way that we can see the true nature of reality and the true nature of our experiences. We don't get into metaphysical aspects of what is real and not. Mera true self kya hai? We don't get into. Buddha doesn't get into that question. The question is, what is the nature of experience? And nature of experience is, it is anicca, dukkha, anatta, and there are other things which he points out, which all point towards disenchantment, towards the all experiences. So it therefore became clear that the first task which we should do is to correct our perception. And we know normally we seek happiness in the outer world and very little idea of inner happiness. But then as meditators, we have moved much ahead of that. We understand there is worldly happiness, there is unworldly happiness, there is greater than unworldly happiness. We have studied about it, discussed about it, so that we discussed. So we start with worldly happiness and then we understand the limitations of one. Then we move towards 2. Then we understand limitations of 2. And we move towards 3, which is the freedom we obtain, the Nibbānam Paramam Sukham. Why? When you obtain by giving up all greed, hatred, and delusion. Rag, Dvesh, Moh samapt ho jaye, then we have that unworldly happiness which is not dependent on conditions at all. And that's what assures that you cross the cycle of birth and death And that's what assures that you have crossed aging and death. So the question naturally arises that we need to check. Have I experientially understood the limitations of worldly happiness? It doesn't mean I give up my job and run away and do that. It doesn't mean that. It means I'm not basing my life on just seeking these. Of course, I have certain, as a householder, I have certain obligations, and I do that job in a sense of that limited responsibility. But I don't spend whole of my life doing just that. So we realize that, yeah, there is need for understanding the limitations of sin. That's what we discussed in the first thing in our discussions in the beginning. What are the limitations of sensory happiness? And that sensory happiness is basically what we get by any sensory pleasures is a temporary silencing of the tanha which was arising for that experience. So when we investigate yathabhuta, then we realize, oh, this is the fact. So if we don't generate tanha, then the problems will be sorted out. And we also realize the limitations. If we get sensory happiness, then we can get addicted to it and so on. Then how do we give it up? Well, we realize the limitations and then work for the higher happiness. And then Buddha's own experience taught us, I had quoted Chulu Dukkha Khanda Sutta, as long as I did not achieve the rapture and bliss that are apart from sensual pleasures and unskillful qualities, or something more peaceful than that, I knew that I might still return to the sensual pleasures. So he's talking about him. Bodhisattva is talking about himself. That I realized कि sensory pleasures बहुत strong attraction है, लेकिन अगर मुझे उससे अच्छा pleasure एक experience हो जाए, which is through meditation, through jhana, through samadhi, good level of samadhi, then I get peace, I get happiness of the kind which is much more subtle, much more, much less dependent on the external world. Then it will be easy to drop the lower one. जैसे कहा जाता है कि अगर आप बहुत अच्छी मिठाई खाने को मिल जाए तो फिर आप सड़ा हुआ गुड़ नहीं खाएंगे. Move ahead from there. That's exactly what Buddha is advising us. And that's what we realize, the need for tranquility meditation. That's a very important thing. Why? It will smoothen our process of developing NIBBIDA for that purpose, so that we can abide in pleasant abiding whenever we want. So we have to practice that. So that's one thing which we learned, really, that is very important. Of course, the main method of moving towards from 2 to 3 would be seeing the arising of sankharas and letting them go. But then we can also see how we really develop the various sannyas so that this process becomes smoothened. Then question naturally arises, one has to introspect and find out what are the sankharas in me which are really very strong, which I should handle properly. And Buddha gives so many different sannyas for different purposes, for lust something, for attraction to food something else, for fear some suggestions are given, for kamachanda suggestions are given, and there are various kinds of sannyas. So we need to really understand them. So the first thing is to introspect. What kind of traits, sankharas are prominent, what latent tendencies are strong in me, so that I know which of my perceptions is in error. That's what it means. A sankhara strong in me means that perception is in error. वो हमको उसको जिसको हम प्रिय मान रहे हैं वो है नहीं, अनित्य दुख अनात्ता है, लेकिन हम उसको देख नहीं पा रहे हैं. तो फिर हमने पढ़ा था वो सच्चित्त सुत्ता में कि भाई जैसे कि एक युवती अपना चेहरा देखती है पानी में, वो देखती है उस पर गंदगी लगी हुई है तो उसको तुरंत हटा देती है, साफ करती है. तो इसी तरह से हमको भी सेल्फ एग्जामिनेशन करना चाहिए ताकि पता चले कौन सी अनहोलसम क्वालिटी है और उसको हटा देंगे. तो किस तरह की इंक्वायरी करनी है? क्या मेरे में राग ज्यादा है? क्या am I often given to longing or am I without longing? Often given to ill will or without ill will? Given to dullness or drowsiness or free from dullness, drowsiness? Am I often restless or calm? Have I too much doubt or am I free from doubt? Do I get very angry often? Is my mind often very impure and agitated? Is my body also? So various possibilities of, which obviously means a deep level of introspection. I should calm down the mind and see into my mental structure and find out what is going on. That's the real meditation. That's the one what you should do, self-examination. And what should be the attitude? The Buddha says, just as one whose clothes or head are on fire would put extraordinary desire, effort, zeal, enthusiasm, a bhikkhu should put forth extraordinary desire, effort, zeal, enthusiasm towards abandon these bad, unwholesome qualities. Now, when you read such things, there are many people who would say, oh, this is Vibhav-tanha, this is not good. Well, firstly, we don't expect Buddha to advise Vibhav-tanha. We have to understand why is he saying so. If they say, oh, no, this is, when we say that sankharas are not me, not mine, not myself, na itadmam, na swamasmi, why bother? Why try to remove defilements? What? Because any attempt to remove defilement is Vibhav-tanha. Obviously, there's a poor understanding of Dhamma. That's all I can say. I'm just seeing the time. So pardon me if I extend the time a little bit. Nikhilji?
Ji, sir.
So there's really a big confusion I have found in some people, and therefore it's very important that we understand that thoroughly. First of all, we must understand that there are paradoxes in teachings. At one end, we read atta hi attano natho, then we read about anatta. Now you can say, ek baat batao bhai, atta hai ki nahi hai. No, that's not the meaning. Of course, you have to understand that. We have to have maturity to understand these things. This is a conventional way of putting it. This is the way of ultimate reality. We have to understand that. Then you every day say, metta practice karna chahiye. May I be happy, may I be peaceful, may all beings be happy. And then we say, there is anatta. Ye kya hua? Metta is all based on atta bhav, and anatta is based on anatta. So are we fooling ourselves? No. We understand the reality, conventional reality, and ultimate reality. We are not arhants. We are not illusion about that. Just because we know the nature of reality is that, but it's not our felt experience. And if it was our felt experience, metta will be a natural practice for us. We'll be filled with loving kindness for everybody. So we have to understand these things. See? Then we say about the kamma principle. No? One say kammasya ka, kamma daya da, and so on. Again, we say it doesn't match with anatta. So we need to understand this. There's I found very surprisingly, very strange confusion in many people about this. You need to understand that reconciliation of apparently contradictory statements is a crucial part of maturing in Dhamma. It means we have not understood Dhamma. If we still feel that, oh, these are all contradictory, we have not really put an effort in understanding Dhamma. And then all our practice is going to not bear any fruit. And this, fortunately, is not true just only in Dhamma, it's true in science now. There's a famous quotation by the great Nobel laureate Niels Bohr, who is one of the originators of quantum theory. It says there are trivial truths and there are great truths. The opposite of a trivial truth is plainly false. The opposite of a great truth is also truth. That's it. That's what you have to really develop our understanding. How wonderful, he says further, how wonderful that we have met with a paradox. Now we have some hope of making progress. And that's the spirit with which a modern scientist works. And we should have that same spirit in understanding Dhamma. Nisargadatta Maharaja puts it very beautifully, in his statement. Love says, I am everything. Wisdom says, I am nothing. And in fact, in another place says, when I look inside, I find I am nothing. When I look outside, I find I am everything. And then he says, between the two, my life flows. These are two truths. And we have to embrace both of them. We can't say one is true and other is not. That's not done. So we need to deeply understand this very important aspect of our teaching of the Buddha. When we say that, when Buddha says, as if your head is on fire and you should work and remove the defilements, it's quite obvious. It's not being done out of tanha. It's being done out of understanding. If I find that there is dirt on my face, and I'll naturally remove it. It's not tanha, it's not vibhav tanha. It's a natural tendency to remove the dirt on the face. Only thing is, I can't see the dirt in my mind. I can feel it and I ignore it. What Buddha says is, don't ignore it. If you want to progress in Dhamma, don't ignore it. You have to understand that suffering is caused by these defilements. Whether you are ignoring them or not ignoring them, doesn't matter. So that's a very important point, which I think we should not get confused about and give up all practice saying that, oh, there's nothing to be done. When we say there is acceptance of what is, that's a very common mistake. Oh, we have been told acceptance of what is. Yes, true, very true. But it doesn't mean that you don't work to change that. Acceptance of what is means that whatever is the situation, you accept it gladly. That's the reality of the moment. We don't create any aversion towards it or any craving for it. Just look at it, understand it. That's it. It is a pleasant feeling. It gives you a pleasant feeling or unpleasant feeling. You don't react to it. That is what is meant by acceptance. But it doesn't mean that we don't change it if it is necessary. If I'm walking and thorn enters into my shoe and I feel the pain, acceptance would mean I understand there's a pain. Okay, I don't make a big huge issue about it. I look at my foot, see what is happening, understand the suffering, see what is happening. Oh, there is a cause of suffering and I must abandon it. I just take out the thorn gently and put it in a proper place, in somewhere below a tree. And the matter ends. There's no tanha involved in it. It's a natural response with sati and panya to a situation. So we must understand non-reactive observation, acceptance of what is, does not mean no action, but action done with sati and panya. That's the key thing which we must remember. And I find many people getting floundering in practice because of that reason. And obviously there will be no progress then. There's no question of progress. So the real understanding of Dhamma, understanding of the nature of reality would mean seeing their true characteristics. And then the disenchantment would be a natural consequence of seeing the characteristics. There will be end of fascination for the world. It doesn't mean we have aversion toward the world, but it doesn't enchant any longer because we see its nature of reality. And that's what is called NIBBIDA. And that's what, as I read out to you, should be the aim of our practice if we have to move in the direction of irreversible transformation. So with this end, what we realized was that, what is really the most crucial thing in our practice is change in view. And the Buddha again and again tells us, Sammaditthi is the forerunner of everything. Why? So that new defilements don't arise and old ones extinguish. This is what we chant. This is what we chant in Ratan Sutta again and again and again. Khinang Puranang Navam Natti Sambhavam Viratta Chitta Ayidike Bhavasmin Te Khina Bija Avirulli Chanda Nibbanti Dhira Yathayam Padipo. That's it. क्षीण हो जाने चाहिए पुराने, नवम नई संभ नए न बने, उनका तभी जाके चित्त जो है हमारा क्षीण बीज हो जाएगा, कोई बीज नहीं रहेगा. There will be no latent tendency in the mind, and then only we'll be free. As long as there is a latent tendency in the mind, consciousness will find a place to hold on to, and you'll have yet another birth and go through the whole issue of suffering, old age, death, suffering, and all kinds of things in between. It's bound to happen. So what is the aim of this practice? What do you mean by Nibbana? Is it another joyous experience we want and enjoy that? Obviously not. The aim purpose is to see clearly that this world and any world for that matter, all realms have fundamental unsatisfactory nature. And therefore, we should work towards purifying the mind consistently and preventing its getting defiled unwittingly, unknowingly, and due to wrong perception. So that's why the first thing we discussed was various kinds of perceptions which will help us to move towards Sammaditi. So I'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay. Thank you very much. So if I think, as I had mentioned, I can take one or two questions so that this part, every part becomes clear. So if there are any questions, please ask. Just one or two questions. Please ask only related to what I said today, not about general practice and things of that kind. Okay. If there are any questions which need clarification, I'll be very happy to give them.
सर एक क्वेश्चन तो नहीं है, बट आई वांटेड टू पॉइंट आउट कि जो कल संडे को टॉक दिया था, तो इट वाज वेरी नाइस कि जो आचार्य मुरो बोल रहे थे वो शायद हम सैटरडे को हमने डिस्कस किया था. तो आई फेल्ट वेरी गुड, लाइक वी अनवर्दी पीपल लाइक बिकम वर्दी ऑफ दोस टॉक्स कि हम रिलेट कर पा रहे थे जो हम यहाँ डिस्कस कर रहे हैं. प्लस द ग्रेट डिसाइपल ऑफ बुद्धा, लास्ट क्वेश्चन आया था कि टू ले विमेन के नाम, तो वो भी शायद हम रिकॉल कर पाएंगे जो हम सुबह पढ़ रहे हैं. तो आई फेल्ट गुड, सो आई वांटेड टू टेल यू.
या, दैट्स ट्रू, दैट्स ट्रू, वेरी ट्रू.
एंड वन मोर थिंग सर, कि जो आपने बोला कि अट्रैक्शन नहीं होना चाहिए, सो द पॉइंट लाइज कि रिपल्शन भी ना हो जाए, वो प्रॉब्लम, दैट्स द बैलेंस.
Yeah, that's true. That's why I've been again and again saying NIBBIDA is not Vibhav Tanha. You have to understand that. This is disenchantment. It's not repulsion as some people try to translate it. That's not a correct translation. It is disenchantment. We are presently enchanted by the world. Ete se tanha jam rupe piya rupam sadhu rupam. जहाँ जहाँ संसार में भगवान जिसे सेकंड नोबल ट्रूथ में कहते हैं ना, तृष्णा दुख का कारण है, तो क्या है ये तृष्णा? यायम तन्हा पौनु भविका नंदी राग सहगता तत्र तत्राभिनंदिनी. नंदी आनंद और राग के साथ चलती है सहगता, और कभी यहाँ कभी वहाँ, यहाँ अभिनंदन करती है, यहाँ उसको पकड़ती है, ये अच्छा है, ये अच्छा है, ये अच्छा है, and gets caught in that. And that's it. And this process keeps on happening round the clock, whether we see it or not see it, it keeps on happening. And we end up defiling our mind. सुबह शाम दिन में 3 बार 4 बार साधना करके कपड़ा मन साफ करते हैं और बाकी 20 घंटे उसको मैला कर देते हैं. So naturally we're not in a position to move with that much intensity as we could if you're more mindful, and as we could if you become more and more correct in our perception, if we change our perception. We develop those various sannyas so that we see the nature of reality as it really is, nature of experience as it really is. Then the whole process of arising tanha will not arise. जैसे मैंने बार बार एग्जाम्पल भी दिया था खिलौनों का, किस तरह से हम अपने बचपन के खिलौनों से ऊपर उठ गए हैं. अब हमारे मन में उसके प्रति कोई द्वेष नहीं है. कोई रिपल्शन नहीं है। कोई अगर बच्चा उसके साथ खेलता है तो हमें कोई दिक्कत नहीं होती है। हम हो सकता है उसके साथ बैठ के 2-5 मिनट खेल भी लें, कोई परेशानी नहीं है। बट वी नो व्हाट इट इज, वी अंडरस्टैंड इट थॉरली, इट डजंट एंटाइस अस एनी लॉन्गर. That's it. So that's a pretty good example for us to understand that. And for us, there are also, for everybody, there are things which has gone up. फिल्म देखना चाहते, बचपन में हम फिल्म देखा करते थे बहुत. We don't feel like seeing them now. They are trends. It's not that we have revulsion towards it. We don't feel like, that's it. There's no need to go to a cinema hall and see a film. What is there in it? It's much better to see our own film. Pretty interesting anyway. All kinds of things are going on. So that's the difference. That's what is meant by change in perception. संन्यास जो हमने डिस्कस की थी वो इसीलिए की थी ताकि नेचुरल प्रोसेस में तृष्णा जागे ही ना. खिलौनों के प्रति अब तृष्णा नहीं जागती. कोई फिल्म हो रही हो तो तृष्णा नहीं जागती कि मैं जाके देख लूं. The matter, it is gone, finished. That's what is meant by अशेष विराग निरोधा. Remainderless cessation of that particular sankhara has happened, finished. Why? Because we have risen above it. We have seen its limitations. That's the reason. Not that we suppressed our desire to have a toy. We got a better toy. So, from worldly happiness, if you translate that into spiritual practice, from worldly happiness, we need a better happiness so that we can stabilize in giving up that. Otherwise, this attraction is so strong, it'll fall back. So we need the stability of a meditative happiness. And that stabilizes and makes sure that we don't fall back again and again and again. Okay. So that's by experience. That's what Buddha is teaching us. So I'm just putting the words of Buddha in front of you. That's all. Okay.
Thank you, Prashad. Very helpful.
Thank you very much.